When Kim Taehyung, also known as V of BTS, stepped onto the stage of the Park Ji-woo show, the audience anticipated another heartfelt and engaging interview from one of K-pop's most beloved stars. But Park Ji-woo wasn't here for a friendly chat. She had a plan. Behind the cameras, producers prepared their edits, the questions were designed to corner him, and the audience had been carefully selected to turn against him at the right moment. This wasn't an interview, it was an ambush. Yet, as Taehyung took his seat, his expression remained unreadable. Park Ji-woo smiled, confident that she was about to create the viral moment of the year. What she didn't realize was that Taehyung already saw the trap, and in just a few minutes, he would turn it against her. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another special story for you. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Taehyung sat in his Seoul apartment, sipping on a cup of warm tea, scrolling through his inbox. Among the usual messages, schedules, fan letters, and event invitations, one subject line stood out. Exclusive invitation. A candid conversation on the Park Ji-woo show. Taehyung's eyes scanned the message. Park Ji-woo, one of South Korea's most influential talk show hosts, was known for her sharp, strategic questioning, especially toward public figures. Taehyung wasn't naive. He knew what this was. Still, he took another sip of tea, thinking. Then, with a calm breath, he typed his response. I'd be honored. Back at the Park Ji-woo show studio, producers circled around a whiteboard, sketching out the perfect trap. Park Ji-woo leaned against her desk, flipping through her cue cards. He's an easy target. Her producer, Min-jae, smirked.
Kim Taehyung?
Seriously, people love that guy. Park Ji-woo rolled her eyes. That's exactly why it'll work. The world sees him as this wholesome, untouchable idol. But the industry needs to move forward. We need new narratives. She tossed a card onto the table. We'll paint him as outdated, a relic of an era that should be left behind. Min-jae nodded slowly. And if he plays into it, Park Ji-woo smirked, then we'll make sure that's the clip that goes viral. The day of the interview, Taehyung stepped out of his black SUV, his demeanor as calm as ever. A few crew members whispered as he passed. Some excited, some skeptical. Even the security guard at the entrance couldn't help but grin. Big fan, Mr. Kim. Taehyung gave a small nod. Thanks, man. Inside, Park Ji-woo's team moved quickly, setting up the perfect shot. Producers adjusted cameras, ensuring the audience was filled with the right mix of people. Some true fans, others ready to challenge him. Every angle was designed to build a narrative. And Taehyung? He simply took his seat across from Park Ji-woo, crossing his hands in his lap. Park Ji-woo greeted him with a flawless smile. The red light on the camera blinked. Kim Taehyung, welcome to the show. And just like that, the trap was set. Park Ji-woo leaned in slightly, her tone warm, inviting, too perfect. Let's start with an easy one. What do you think about the future of K-pop? Taehyung gave a small smile, the same easy, calm smile he always had. But what no one in the room knew, not Park Ji-woo, not the producers, not the carefully placed audience members, was that Taehyung had already seen right through them. And within minutes, he would turn this interview into something they never saw coming. The studio was perfectly staged. The cameras framed Park Ji-woo and Taehyung at just the right angles, the lighting softening Taehyung's features, giving him the look of a timeless idol, one that Park Ji-woo planned to deconstruct piece by piece. Her producers sat behind the monitors watching the feed with sharp, calculating eyes. This wasn't just an interview, it was a setup. And Park Ji-woo? She was about to spring the trap. Park Ji-woo flashed a warm smile, the kind designed to disarm her guests. Taehyung, thank you so much for being here. It's an honor. Taehyung gave a small nod. The pleasure's mine. His voice was calm, even. The audience clapped softly, the atmosphere still light. Park Ji-woo leaned in slightly. You have one of the most fascinating careers in K-pop. You've been a singer, a performer, even an actor. And somehow, people just seem to adore you. Taehyung tilted his head slightly. I've been lucky. Park Ji-woo chuckled, shaking her head. Luck, maybe. But let's be honest. You represent something very specific in the industry. A certain type of idol. Taehyung's expression didn't change. He could feel it, the shift, the first move. Park Jae-woo kept her tone light, almost playful. The industry is changing, Taehyung. We're seeing a shift in the kinds of stories being told. The era of the untouchable idol, the perfect, polished image. It feels like it's fading. She paused, watching him carefully. Do you think idols like you still have a place in the future of K-pop? Taehyung sat back slightly. For a moment, the room felt still. Then he smiled. Well, I think stories change, but values don't. Park Jae-woo's smile twitched. Values? Taehyung nodded. Passion, loyalty, standing up for what's right. Those things don't go out of style. How we tell those stories might change, but why we tell them doesn't. The audience shifted slightly. Park Jae-woo noticed. She needed to push harder. Her smile tightened as she flipped through her cue cards. She skipped ahead, no more small talk. It was time for the real attack. Taehyung, you've been part of some of the most iconic performances in K-pop history. Your image is powerful, flawless, dominant. But isn't that part of the problem? Taehyung raised an eyebrow. Park Jae-woo leaned in. Don't you think these kinds of roles promote an outdated version of perfection? One that glorifies an unattainable standard and an unwillingness to show vulnerability. The audience stilled. Some people nodded, murmuring in agreement. Others looked between Taehyung and Park Jae-woo, sensing the tension rising. The producers smiled to themselves. This was it, the soundbite. If Taehyung responded defensively, if he got angry or dismissive, they had their viral clip. But Taehyung? He just smiled. He glanced at Park Jae-woo, then at the audience, his expression unreadable. Then, in the calmest, most effortless tone, he said, "Well, that's an interesting way to look at it." A pause. Park Jae-woo leaned forward. The entire room waited. Because in the next few seconds, Kim Taehyung was about to flip this entire interview upside down. The silence stretched. Park Jae-woo sat poised, waiting for Taehyung to falter, to hesitate, to react. But he didn't. Instead, he smiled. A calm, effortless smile. One that carried more weight than 1,000 words. The audience leaned in. The producers held their breath. And then Taehyung spoke. That's an interesting way to look at it. His voice was steady, unwavering. Park Jae-woo raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. He did. But I don't think telling stories about passion, sacrifice, and connecting with people is toxic. Do you? Park Jae-woo's smile faltered just slightly. The audience shifted. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't angry. He was flipping the question back on her. And now she had to answer. Park Jae-woo laughed lightly, masking her discomfort. Of course not. But the way those values are shown in the industry, let's be honest, Taehyung, a lot of your performances center around perfection. Don't you think that has an impact? Taehyung nodded slowly, as if he were actually considering her words. Then he leaned forward, his voice softer but pointed. Do you believe stories should stop showing growth? Park Jae-woo hesitated. Taehyung's expression didn't change. Because if we remove every story that includes struggle, redemption, and yes, even imperfection, then what are we left with? The audience murmured. Park Jae-woo blinked. That's not what I'm saying. Taehyung smiled again, but this time there was an edge to it. Then what are you saying? Park Jae-woo's team scrambled behind the cameras. This wasn't going how they planned. Taehyung wasn't playing into the narrative. He wasn't falling into their trap. Instead, he was making them justify their own argument. And the more he spoke, the more the audience began to question Park Jae-woo's intent. Some crossed their arms. Others exchanged glances. Taehyung saw it. So did Park Jae-woo. And she didn't like it, not one bit. Park Jae-woo forced another charming smile, adjusting in her seat. She needed to regain dominance over the conversation, so she pivoted. Taehyung, you've always been admired for your kindness, your humility, and yet, so many of your performances portray an image of perfection. Isn't that a contradiction? Taehyung tilted his head slightly. Why would it be? Park Jae-woo blinked. Taehyung continued, Are you saying that people who practice kindness aren't capable of striving for excellence? Boom. The audience visibly reacted. Park Jae-woo paused too long. The producers panicked. They needed to cut to commercial, but Taehyung wasn't finished. He glanced at the audience, his voice still calm, controlled. I was raised to believe that kindness and ambition aren't opposites. A pause. That standing for what's right doesn't mean you're aggressive. It means you care. Another pause. The energy in the room had completely changed. Park Jae-woo knew it. Taehyung knew it. And in that moment, the balance of power shifted. Park Jae-woo's producers scrambled behind the cameras, whispering frantically. They needed to redirect the conversation to regain control. But it was too late, because now Taehyung had set the tone. And in the next few moments, he would take it even further. The room was silent. Taehyung's calm response had caught everyone off guard. Park Jae-woo had expected hesitation, frustration, maybe even defensiveness. But instead, he had given her nothing. Just a small smile, just a single sentence. And somehow that made the moment even more tense. Taehyung sat back slightly, still relaxed, composed. That's an interesting way to look at it. Park Jae-woo blinked, waiting for him to explain himself. Taehyung folded his hands together. But I see it differently. Park Jae-woo kept her expression steady, though she felt a flicker of irritation. Oh? How so? Taehyung's voice remained gentle, but there was a quiet weight behind it. If protecting the people we love, if standing up for what's right, if fighting against injustice makes someone toxic, he paused. Then with the softest shrug, then I'm happy to be toxic. A murmur spread through the audience. A few people nodded. Some exchanged uncertain glances. Even the producers watching from the control booth hesitated. This wasn't what they expected. Park Jae-woo forced a small laugh, shaking her head. That's a very poetic answer, Taehyung. But let's talk facts. She flipped through her cue cards, her tone sharpening. Your performances, your image, they center around perfection, around an unattainable standard. Doesn't that send the wrong message? Taehyung tilted his head, considering her words. Then I think stories are more than what happens on the surface. Park Jae-woo frowned. Taehyung leaned forward slightly. I think what matters isn't what my image portrays, but why it resonates. He exhaled slowly, as if choosing his next words carefully. I was raised in a small town in Korea. The audience quieted. Even Park Jae-woo blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift in tone. Taehyung continued, I grew up watching my family work harder than anyone I knew. Watching them struggle, sacrifice, protect me. Pause. They taught me that strength isn't about perfection. It's about responsibility. About standing up for people who can't always stand up for themselves. Park Jae-woo opened her mouth to respond, but he wasn't finished. And the people who taught me music, they taught me the same thing, that real artistry isn't about being flawless. His gaze locked onto hers. It's about knowing when to be human. The room was completely still. Park Jae-woo forced another laugh, but it was thinner this time. She could feel the momentum shifting. Taehyung wasn't playing into the narrative she had prepared. If anything, he was dismantling it piece by piece. She cleared her throat. That's a beautiful sentiment, Taehyung. But at the end of the day, your image is about perfection, about an unattainable standard. Don't you think the industry should be moving away from that? Taehyung considered her words, then softly, I think the industry should move toward truth. Park Jae-woo frowned. Taehyung gestured toward the audience. People don't follow BTS because they want to see perfection. His voice was measured, thoughtful. They follow us because they understand struggle. They understand growth. And they understand the desire to connect with what matters. A pause. That's not toxic. That's human. The audience shifted again. Park Jae-woo could feel it. She was losing them. Her heart pounded. She had to regain control, fast. She glanced at her producers, who were already signaling for her to change tactics. This wasn't going how they had planned. So, with a forced smile, she set down her cue cards. And then she made a choice, one that she would soon regret. She leaned in and said, Taehyung, do you really believe that? Or is this just another idle script? The audience gasped. And Taehyung? He just smiled. Because Park Jae-woo had just made her biggest mistake yet. The words hung in the air. Taehyung, do you really believe that? Or is this just another idol script? The audience shifted. A few murmured, sensing the hostility in Park Jae-woo's voice. The producers in the control room leaned forward, watching closely. This was it. Park Jae-woo had pushed him. Now they just needed Taehyung to push back. But instead, he didn't react at all. Taehyung sat calmly, his expression unreadable. Then he let out a soft chuckle. An idol script? He tapped his fingers lightly against his knee, taking his time. No, I don't think truth needs a script. Park Jae-woo's smile tightened. Taehyung met her gaze, his voice steady, controlled. But I do think people sometimes mistake conversation for confrontation. The audience stilled. Park Jae-woo blinked. Taehyung continued, I came here thinking we were having a conversation. He tilted his head slightly. But it feels like you came here looking for something else. Park Jae-woo flushed. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She needed to take control back. Fast. Park Jae-woo forced another laugh, but it was thinner this time. She picked up her cue cards, flipping through them quickly. She had to change tactics. She had to make Taehyung look out of touch, outdated, irrelevant. So, she tried a different approach. Taehyung, you've had an incredible career. She smiled smoothly, her tone turning saccharine. But the industry is changing. Wouldn't you agree that it's time for new voices, new stories, maybe even new faces? Taehyung simply raised an eyebrow. Park Jae-woo continued, there's been a lot of talk about older idols stepping aside to make space for the next generation. Do you think maybe it's time to do the same? The audience stilled again. Some looked at Taehyung. Others looked at Park Jae-woo, realizing what she had just implied. She wasn't asking about the industry. She was telling Taehyung that he was past his time. The trap was set. All she needed was for him to take the bait. But Taehyung? He didn't take it. Instead, he simply smiled. And then, with a voice so calm it sent shivers down the audience's spine, he said, when I was a kid, I was taught that respect for those who came before us was essential. A pause. Then it's interesting how today, respect seems optional. The room went silent. Not a single person moved. Even the producers in the control room stopped what they were doing. Park Jae-woo's smile dropped. She tried to laugh, but it sounded forced. Because she could feel it. She had lost. Taehyung hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't attacked her. But he had just turned her entire argument against her. And the audience? They weren't laughing with her anymore. They were watching Taehyung. And some of them were already pulling out their phones, recording. Park Jae-woo swallowed, trying to recover. She glanced at her producers, waiting for a signal, a way out. But it was too late. Because while Park Jae-woo was still trying to figure out what had just happened, the rest of the world, they were about to see it for themselves. Because that clip? It was already going viral. The moment hung in the air like a final note of a symphony. One that no one expected Taehyung to play. The studio was silent. The audience stared, some leaning forward, others already holding up their phones, recording the moment. Park Jae-woo's smile had faded, her perfectly curated demeanor slipping for the first time in her own show. She wasn't the one in control. And the worst part? She knew it. As soon as the interview cut to commercial break, the damage was already done. Inside the control room, producers scrambled, shouting orders. We need to edit this before it airs. Too late. People are already posting it. Because while Park Jae-woo's team was trying to contain the situation, the internet, it had already exploded. Within minutes, the clip had been shared on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. Trending hashtags appeared almost instantly. Hashtag respect isn't optional. Hashtag Taehyung didn't flinch. Hashtag Park Jae-woo exposed. Comment sections blew up. Taehyung just destroyed her with one sentence and didn't even raise his voice. She walked right into it. She thought she could trap him, and he made her look like a fool. This is how you handle an ambush. Absolute class. In real time, people reacted, dissecting every second of the moment. Influencers jumped in. News outlets started covering it. And Park Jae-woo? She was trapped in the very kind of viral storm she had built her career creating for others. Back in the studio, Park Jae-woo's team was scrambling. Her assistant approached, whispering urgently, "Jae-woo, the clip is everywhere." Park Jae-woo clenched her jaw, forcing a tense smile as she sipped her water. She had planned for this interview to trend, but not like this. Not with her looking weak. She needed to fix this fast. The show returned from commercial break, the cameras rolling. Park Jae-woo took a deep breath and forced a laugh, trying to reset the mood. "Well, Taehyung, that certainly was a spirited discussion." Taehyung just smiled. Park Jae-woo turned back to the camera. "Folks, we'll continue this conversation online. Don't forget to subscribe and..." But it was too late, because while Park Jae-woo tried to pivot, people weren't listening to her anymore. They were listening to Taehyung. And now, he didn't need to say another word. By the end of the night, the interview wasn't just trending, it was dominating the news cycle. Mainstream media picked it up, breaking down the exchange frame by frame. Pundits weighed in. Some defended Park Jae-woo, claiming she was just asking the tough questions. But others saw right through it. She tried to bait him, and Taehyung, being Taehyung, turned it into a masterclass in humility. There's a reason people love this guy. He doesn't play these media games. Park Jae-woo underestimated him. She thought she could corner him. She forgot who she was dealing with. And Park Jae-woo? She had to watch in real time as her own reputation crumbled. Because for once, she wasn't controlling the narrative. And it was about to get even worse. The next morning, as Park Jae-woo entered her office, her assistant was waiting, phone in hand. Her face was pale. "Jae-woo, we have a problem." Park Jae-woo exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. "What now?" The assistant turned her phone around. A new video had surfaced. Taehyung, walking out of a small cafe, was approached by a reporter. The journalist, holding up a microphone, asked, "Taehyung, do you have anything to say about the interview with Park Jae-woo?" And Taehyung? He just smiled. Then, in the calmest voice imaginable, he said, "Kindness never goes out of style." The video ended. Park Jae-woo's heart sank, because in just 6 words, Taehyung had said everything. And now, there was nothing she could do to stop it. Park Jae-woo stared at her screen. The video of Taehyung had already surpassed 5 million views in less than 24 hours. 6 words. Just 6 words. Kindness never goes out of style. And now, those words were everywhere. Social media was on fire. A new hashtag emerged. #KindnessWins. Memes flooded Twitter. GIFs of Taehyung smiling at Park Jae-woo during the interview appeared next to the moment he delivered the phrase outside the cafe. On TikTok, a trend exploded. People facing tense situations and responding with, "Kindness never goes out of style." It was a cultural shift. And Taehyung? He wasn't even online. The industry noticed. Fellow idols and producers took sides. Some praised Taehyung as a class act. Others defended Park Jae-woo, saying she was just doing her job. But the public? They had already chosen. Taehyung didn't just win the interview, he won the conversation. And Park Jae-woo? She was on the wrong side of it. She refused to go down quietly. She recorded a response video. "I have nothing but respect for Kim Taehyung. But let's be honest, his fans took this out of context. I was just doing my job." She paused, then delivered her twist. If people can't handle a little healthy debate, maybe the real issue isn't the industry, maybe it's fragility. Boom! An attempt to flip the narrative. She hit upload and waited. First, her supporters cheered. She's right. Taehyung didn't even answer her question. Why does everyone treat Taehyung like an untouchable saint? But then, the internet turned. She lost the debate. And now she's blaming Taehyung for being too nice. Just like that, her plan backfired. The next day, 3 sponsors pulled out. Her network called an emergency meeting. Then, a new email landed in her inbox. Urgent meeting about the future of the Park Jae-woo show. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't just a viral moment. This was career-ending territory. And she was out of moves. Park Jae-woo stared at the email. meeting about the future of the show. Her throat was dry. Her empire was at risk. And all because of him, Kim Taehyung. While Park Jae-woo scrambled. Taehyung? He hadn't said a word.
No statements. No interviews.
He went about his life as if nothing had happened. And that only made it worse for Park Jae-woo. Because whenever someone tried to drag him back into the debate, someone else simply replied, "Kindness never goes out of style." The internet had already decided. Taehyung had won. Park Jae-woo? She was just prolonging her own downfall. That afternoon, a reporter caught Taehyung outside a bookstore. "Taehyung, do you have any final words about the Park Jae-woo interview?" Holding a cup of coffee, he paused. Then he smiled. And with his signature grace, he said, "I think we should all try listening more than we speak." A simple sentence, but once again, it was enough. The video went viral immediately. And for Park Jae-woo, it was the final nail in the coffin. Park Jae-woo built her career on sharp, aggressive interviews, putting K-pop's biggest names on the spot. She thought Kim Taehyung would be an easy target. She was wrong from the start. She controlled the conversation, pushing Taehyung to admit his image was outdated. But Taehyung? He never took the bait. Instead, he answered with calm, measured words, turning the conversation back on her. Then, with a simple sentence, he dismantled her entire attack. "When I was a kid, I was taught that respect for those who came before us was essential. It's interesting how today, respect seems optional." The audience shifted. Park Jae-woo felt it. She had lost control. Within hours, the interview went viral. Millions of people dissected every second. Hashtag respect isn't optional. Hashtag Taehyung didn't flinch. Hashtag kindness wins. Then, another video surfaced. Taehyung leaving a cafe, responding to a question about the controversy. His answer? Kindness never goes out of style. That was it. People turned it into memes, TikToks, life mottos. And Park Jae-woo? She was stuck in the storm. The backlash wasn't just online. 3 major sponsors pulled out. Viewership plummeted. The network demanded damage control. On her next episode, she addressed the controversy. "I regret if my words were misinterpreted." It wasn't a full apology, but it was the closest she would get. And it didn't matter, because the damage was done. Her credibility never recovered. Over the next few months, her show was quietly phased out. Meanwhile, Taehyung? He simply moved on. Because some battles aren't won by fighting. Some wars are won with silence. Park Jae-woo tried to bury Kim Taehyung. Instead, she buried herself. And Taehyung, without even trying, proved the greatest lesson of all. True power doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be real.